And years ago, we had our big global pandemic, and I was bunkered down in this basement here. And I made my very first purchase for an Arcade1Up unit. I got the Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition cabinet for pretty much a couple $100, including the riser. And that set off my journey into this whole home arcade space to the point that, as you can tell, I've created this little YouTube channel around it. And like many others, I've been a very large fan of Arcade1Up, but I've also been disappointed by Arcade1Up. And that's not to say that this is going to be another YouTube video about how Arcade1Up is dead. But from a more outsider perspective at this point, and I say that in the way that I haven't been in the rumor mills on these Arcade1Up groups like some of you guys have been. I haven't been entering live chats and streams and all these sorts of things, talking about how Arcade1Up has fallen from grace. What I mean is I've kind of moved on, and I haven't really put a ton of stock into what Arcade1Up is doing at this point. I've kind of just loosely followed what they've been doing on different Facebook groups and seeing the new releases that come to my emails from them. And at this point, I think I get what it is that Arcade1Up is trying to do. And I think that what a lot of people are kind of hoping for, getting upset over, is a little overstated at this point. And this video is to offer a bit of a different perspective on Arcade1Up and what they're doing in the home arcade space. So let's take a When Arcade1Up started, we had a lot of excitement in the retro gaming scene from seeing a lot of these childhood arcade cabinets that, for many people, myself included, weren't physically viable, so these machines were too big, and weren't financially viable because to buy some of the original units that we grew up with, we're talking thousands upon thousands in some cases. So Arcade1Up really carved a niche for a lot of us in the way that they were offering these great form factor units at a very reasonable price point, and were able to cater to the masses in that way. And this brand itself evolved from taking that approach to kind of focusing on something different. And what I mean by that is we've moved from seeing these exciting announcements over the years with brand new intellectual properties in the home arcade space to pretty much retreads of the same games over and over and over again. And I think something that we need to consider, and something that I've kind of just realized over the past year with Arcade1Up, is first off, I truly don't think they necessarily care at this point. I think their brand has been established enough and become semi-mainstream enough that at this junction, they're looking at this as a pure, how can we move units? And I know that might sound horrible to some of these diehards who started with this brand, and in some ways it does sting a little bit. But they are a business, and Arcade1Up is in this space to make money, and I think they figured out what they can sell and what they can't sell. And I unfortunately believe that making intellectual properties that not many people are going to pick up on, or only a select few are going to pick up on, presents bigger challenges than just even selling them. It prevents a bigger challenge in how can they actually make these units affordable for the common person versus not. If you have an obscure title, I don't know, let's say you have a House of the Dead unit, which in my opinion, I love that game. Many retro gamers love that game, okay? But is that a IP that's as big as Pac-Man? Absolutely not. So the chance of Arcade1Up recouping their costs with R&D, recouping their costs with people actually buying that unit, recouping their costs in terms of the construction that it takes to build a unit like that, probably aren't there. And so if they were to do this to pander to the hardcore audiences, they have to shoot up the price. And this leads to the bottleneck that you've seen in a lot of the Arcade1Up community, in that these units are now considered unaffordable. They're considered too expensive for what someone would want to pay for these units versus what they probably have to charge to recuperate for these units. Now, for those of you watching, I'm probably going to get some individuals who are going to tell me they have some high-level understanding of how these units are built and the cost that goes into them. Ultimately, I'm looking at this as a business. And I respect a lot of the things that Arcade1Up did. I respect a lot of the ways that they came to market, the way that they helped build communities around that market. But I'm also not naive to the fact that markets change, buyers change. We are currently in the midst of an economy that's really uncertain in North America, especially for a lot of people. And so you have to look at what is the viability of selling these units or selling new IPs or putting research and development into new IPs, and what is going to recuperate the money for those devices. And I really do believe that when it comes to what Arcade1Up is doing, I think they're purely treating it like this. And I don't know if it's because this is putting them into survival mode, but I think this is putting them into a position where they're looking at it as, this is where we can make money. These other IPs that we understand people love, unfortunately, aren't going to sell. And if they do sell, we're going to have to sell them at a heavy premium in order to recuperate our costs on that. And when you look at it from that perspective, it makes sense why this whole entire community that's eaten itself from the inside out is not getting what they want. And what I mean by that is they're eating themselves from the inside out as, these are too expensive, this isn't 100% arcade accurate. I think this is becoming a little tired, personally. I myself understand what these units are. I've always understand what they are. They're not the authentic 100% one-to-one units. They're replicas. They're smaller form factor devices that give me a little bit of what the originals gave me. I would love to tell you I have some 500,000 square foot house that I can house full-size units in, but that's not the reality of how I live, and it's not the reality of how many others live. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I understand that there's going to be concessions on these units. There's going to be accuracies that are missing on these units, and I realize that Arcade1Up, I think, gets this too. And I think they look at it from the perspective that we're not going to reach that one-to-one approach that people are apparently demanding in the community. And because of that, we're not going to be able to release these new units at this hefty premium because of that. And if we do, we're going to get basically desecrated online and told that we're not creating devices that are worth the price tag. Therefore, those units don't move, and then we're back to square one. And so I think what you see now is that Arcade1Up is essentially abandoned that part of the community, that's demanding more but wanting to pay less, but also demanding more and expecting something that I really don't think is going to happen in this price range that they believe to be acceptable. And so what you end up with is them saying, we get it, guys, we're just going to move on to the consumers who are going to buy our units, which are often people who have a fondness for retro gaming, but they're more casual. And you're starting to see, and I myself work in home sales. I'm starting to see some of these units pop up in homes, and they're not the killer instincts that I'm seeing. It's Pac-Mans. It's Mortal Kombats. These are becoming more commonplace in the average home for people who want a taste of that retro nostalgia, but they're not going to be, like me, having a full home arcade in their homes. And I think that's the market Arcade1Up's going for. They're going for some of these one-off buyers who are looking at Christmas time. How can I get something special for my husband? Or what little piece can I add to my man cave that I think would be cool when I have my buddies over on the weekend to have some beers? And I think that's the approach they're taking. And I think that approach includes Pac-Man re-releases. That approach includes Mortal Kombat re-releases. That approach includes Street Fighter releases, because these are IPs that are common enough for that 40 plus demographic that they want those devices in their home. And I would love to say that there's more people who want Time Crisis or more casual gamers who want Killer Instincts, but I think unfortunately that's not the nature of what's out there. And I could be mistaken. Maybe you guys can post this in the comments, I don't know. I can't see Time Crisis having set record sales for Arcade1Up. But there's a reason why we got Pac-Man coming out 40 different times through Arcade1Up. Because people look at Pac-Man as something that it's something they will play. It's something that appeals to them when they were hanging out as young adults at bars where you'd have a Pac-Man or a Miss Pac-Man in the corner, right? And I'm not saying that people don't value those other games, but I think that the casual retro gamer looks at Miss Pac-Man or Mortal Kombat as something that they're going to buy. And I think that there's a lot of buyers who will continuously buy those units. And when you think about it from a cost perspective, Arcade1Up's probably recuperated their costs on R&D on a lot of these devices. That's why we're seeing a lot of retreads or reskins. And what I'm trying to get at is, I know I've heard some guys kind of chatter in the Facebook groups, and I haven't really explored this too far, that Arcade1Up is recuperating a loan that they took out to help fund their business, and that's why they're focusing on this market. I don't really know why that's even a thing that people are going as, like, yep, we got you, Arcade1Up, this is who they are. A lot of businesses take this model. How do you expect businesses to get off the ground at such a large scale? I myself work in a business where this happens all the time. You take loans out to fund certain things and then pay off your loan. And sometimes that means doing things that are profitable. Now, I understand there's the sting of the community being in this position where they feel like they've been forgotten. But I also look back at my time in this space, and a lot of this community attacked itself from within and constantly held Arcade1Up to this unreasonable standard that they were going to create these almost 3/4 but 100% arcade accurate devices at an ultra low cost, without understanding that markets change, prices change, demand changes, supply changes, and as a result, the user and consumer sometimes will have to pay more, especially with some of the things that people are expecting from Arcade1Up. And so in a lot of ways, I don't blame Arcade1Up from saying, look, this space that we originally started with isn't, first off, very profitable, and they're not a space that we're going to ever really satisfy. And instead, they focused on the profitable space, the space that they're probably going to make money in and going to be appreciated in, really. And that space is more casual retro gamers who want to have a little Pac-Man in the corner of their man cave. And I think that's going to be the strategy for Arcade1Up, probably for the long term. And for me, it's bittersweet for me because I did like seeing all the new releases. I also like seeing the excitement in the space when we saw new releases, but I also heavily disliked the weird assumption that Arcade1Up was going to be able to do more but charge less. And I personally felt like this was, in my opinion, something that, I don't know if I consciously did it, but I completely distanced myself away from a lot of, pretty much early into my YouTubing videos on Arcade1Up, because I just don't really have the energy or time as a grown-ass man to be freaking out over the quality of joystick on my $250 Miss Pac-Man machine.